Hello, and welcome back to the Publisher Podcast from Media Voices. I'm Peter Houston, and this season we are bringing you the best sessions from the Definitive AI Forum for Media, Information and Events, which we held with Flashes and Flames in London at the end of last year. Each episode is accompanied by a write-up of the key takeaways, which you can find on our site, voices.media, or get delivered straight to your inbox every Tuesday by subscribing to the Publisher newsletter, which is also linked from voices.media. Before we get to this week's interview, I just wanted to let you know that from the end of February through March, we'll be running a series of AI-focused masterclasses online. These are the masterclasses we first hosted in person at our AI event in November. They're all focused on how to get the best from AI in your publishing business, from measuring ROI to optimizing engagement and content discovery. They'll run every Wednesday from the end of February, and you can book now at voices.media/masterclasses using the discount code MV25 to save 25% on the $49.99 ticket price. Now back to this week's episode, which features Jon Slade, CEO at the Financial Times, speaking with Seedelta's Chris Duncan about how the business information publisher is taking on the AI challenge. Jon talked about how he sees AI as part of a larger disruption that will force publishers back to the fundamentals of strong journalism and strong brands, along with the development of new product. He spoke about the FT's approach to licensing and the brand's long-term focus on direct corporate deals rather than licensing to LLMs. He also spoke about the role of the FT's archive in creating predictive intelligence products. Chris began by asking Jon about the challenges of the AI era.
You're recently installed, congratulations, as the CEO of the FT.
That still sounds weird, by the way.
To all of us, Jon.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting to me. So I sort of think of John Ridding's kind of reign. John Ridding did 20 years and was probably during the era of paid content for the FT. And I think I said to you before, like I suspect you're right here starting as the CEO who's going to take over just as the kind of AI generative era begins. And is that sort of how you think about your challenge at the FT?
Yeah, I think that's probably not too far off. I mean, I think we have a really fantastic business that we built over the last 20 years. The paid content side of that is the core, really. It's what drives 55% of our revenue now and growing. But the other sides of our business are strong as a consequence of that. Our ad business is good because we've got a good subscription business. So we're in a good place, and I feel very fortunate to take over from Jon with that strong base and foundation to build from. I think AI is one of the challenges that we have to get into in the next era. And I was saying to Colin actually earlier, when I was applying for the role, I felt like I needed to have a sort of a 5-point plan. And you can't be a CEO without saying AI is one of my 5-point plans. Now, I've actually revised that a little bit as we're going into next year. And I think disruption in general is a far wider issue that we have to deal with as an industry and at the FT specifically. AI is obviously a very significant component of that, but we're also dealing with the changing reading habits of younger readers, for example, which I think is substantial. Yep. We're dealing with an assault on truth and trust and facts, which come from the centres of politics in the world. And that's a massive disruption too. And of course, all of the other global turmoil that we're dealing with. However, within that, AI is a very big chunk. To some extent, I think we go back to first principles. Mm-hmm. It means investing more in our journalism and in original journalism. It means investing more in telling the story of the brand. And neither of those are technology solutions, but they are a response to a technology issue. But it also means leaning into technology, whether it's experimenting with it for our own internal use, or developing new lines of business, or developing new customer products. And I think the licensing conversation that I was just listening to there is a really, for us, actually a quite exciting opportunity for developing a new line of business. Just on that, I hear a lot of talk about the pitfalls or the upsides of licensing to large language models or to big tech companies. We do some of that. We've done some of that. It has some upside to it. It has some risk too. It's certainly not a perfect model. But we're much more interested in the direct licensing we can do to corporates. We have an excellent licensing business which is built around human licensing. We also call that subscriptions. But we license access to the FT through our corporate business. And we're now building into that machine reading licenses as well. So you can take an access license to the FT where all of your people can read our journalism, but you can also take a machine reading license where you're not just getting the 2D artifact of the article, but you're getting all of the data behind that as well, and you're getting access to our archive. And there's much more control for us in that business, which allows us to be much more confident about how it's being used, how it's being surfaced, and to set controls around usage.
And that's a closed, so I'm a bank, let's say, and I'm in a license.
You're a bank, you're a legal company, you're a communications business, you can have a human reading license, and as an adjacency to that, we can build a machine reading license as well. I think that's a very exciting area for us to develop a much more sustainable business around. I think large language model, big tech licensing, I want the same thing for Christmas as Tammy does. I'm not sure which Christmas that's going to arrive.
No.
I don't think it'll be this Christmas. But if we can build some kind of controls into that, great. I am not hugely confident that there is a sustainable business around that type of licensing. I'm much more confident there's a sustainable business in direct
to business. So you've got some interesting positions, right? You're a long-term Google partner. You are an OpenAI deal partner. You're a Perplexity litigant.
We are not.
No?
Nikkei, our parent company, are.
I know that.
Yeah.
You are somehow remotely involved in litigating Perplexity. So you're kind of a mix. You're doing deals, but you're also working with partners.
Yeah.
You're in and you're out. Can you just explain how you come about that? And I think people would be really interested in, when you think about literally signing those deals, what's the decision-making process within the FT about thinking about that?
Yeah. Well, we've learned a lot as we've gone through it, and we are probably 2.5 years since we signed our first deal.
Yep.
And we have 3-4 reasonable-ish deals that we've signed. And I think each time we've signed one, we've learned more as we've gone. They are of different scale. They include different parts of our archive, from lots of it to not much of it. Some of them include a live feed, some do not. Some have a delay on them, some don't. Some allow for surfacing, some don't. There's quite a spectrum of aspects to it. Predominantly, we're looking for the maximum amount of control that we can get over the use of our content. We are always looking, and a very common thing in all of those deals is, have we got what we call the big red button? And the big red button is the thing that allows us to go, we don't like what we're seeing. We've got to hope that we have the transparency that we've agreed in the contract, but assuming that we do, if we don't like what we're seeing, we press the big red button. Now, that doesn't take the salt out of the soup, so to speak, but it does stop access to our archive. It does stop any further surfacing of content, and that allows us to feel relatively relaxed that if we don't like it, we can cut out. So not everybody that we've spoken to has agreed to that, and so we haven't signed those deals. So as a first order, if we can't get out, if we don't like it, then we're not going to do the deal. Then we've got to look at the money that's attached, and that's complicated and subjective. And funnily enough, we think what we've got is worth more than what our buyers think. And our job is to kind of talk that up.
Yeah.
So we're in a privileged position at the FT because I think there is an implicit sense that FT journalism is of high value and of high worth. But putting a number to it has proven difficult. I would say I'm broadly happy with the kind of numbers that we've achieved. They've certainly been useful. But back to my earlier point, I don't think they're sustainable.
It's not a business, no. And I promised in the spirit of transparency, I said to John I wouldn't ask him the exact commercial nature of the deals. So how much were they worth?
Well, the first one, no, I'm not going to tell you that.
So just interesting in that concept of 3 or 4 deals and each one's slightly different. Is that sort of an optimization, as in the last one you think is much, much better than the first one? Or has that been sort of horses for courses?
Yeah, good question. It's probably a bit of a mix of that. I think we've learnt as we've gone through the deals which aspects we need to push harder on.
Yeah.
So liability, for example, is a kind of non-negotiable. We have precedent from previous deals that we can feel more confident that actually the partner we're dealing with is not too dissimilar to the previous deal. If it was okay with them, I don't see why it shouldn't be okay with you. So there's precedent built into that as well. But yeah, to an extent, it's been opportunistic. So.
And let's assume if I did a licensing deal with another, it's a straight deal. I've sold a license. Quite a lot of the deals that I've seen have been, I've done a deal for a licensing of the content, and in return I'll take on a technology partnership tools, kind of newsroom training. It's a package deal. Have you done those kind of deals?
Yeah, we've done one of those. Yeah, it's a relatively low level of exchange.
Yeah.
So the bulk of it is around licensing. There's some licensing that we've received in return for access to tools. Not much by way of training, some, but a little. So in the main, I think we've seen them as straight licensing deals with
and
a few
kind of
frills around the edge.
I was thinking, nice to have money, not this is a new business money.
Well, it's good money, right? It's just not money that I think is necessarily repeatable. You know, if I've learned anything from my 20-odd years at the FT, the mantra is this recurring revenue? Because recurring revenue is the thing that allows you to sleep well at night. And the greater proportion of it you have, the better night's sleep you have. And at the moment, I'm not getting much sleep at all because I'm flying around too much. But yeah, I don't think that the bulk of the licensing deals we've done have a good enough repeat function to them. I think the landscape is changing. I think it requires, and I'm again with Tammy on this, I think it requires much more regulatory pressure to really make those people come to the party on a consistent basis. I think we have a good carrot to play as well, which is to the extent that we can withdraw access, and that is more or less possible, depending on the technology company you're talking about. But to the extent that we can withdraw access and we're creating scarcity, and it should be mutually reinforceable that you need good content to make a great product, and we want your money so that we can invest that in making more great content. That should be a dynamic that plays out. I think it only plays out effectively if there is a good enough regulatory stick to back that kind of argument.
I agree. You need a regulatory sheepdog kind of barking in the background, don't you, otherwise?
Yeah, I think so, unless you're prepared to say, okay, we'll cut the cord and we'll take everything that comes with that. I mean, partly I sort of think about Google Zero in that context a little bit. I mean, I think I would actively seek Google Zero, as in no traffic from Google. I would be pleased to be freed from the addiction to an algorithm or a product engineer in Silicon Valley's decision about whether my content appears or not. So I would like us to push more in that direction and to get to a point where we could say, actually, that's fine. We'll create that scarcity by cutting the cord.
And I suppose that's part of your rationalisation also for doing deals, isn't it? It is creating a marketplace. It is essentially getting an exchange of cash.
Well, yeah, so definitely that. I think it is important philosophically to be able to say, you sign a contract that accepts that you need to pay to use our journalism, not just nick it. And I consider it thieving, what's been done. So for a big tech company to acknowledge that that is something that they have to do, I think is an important precedent to have set. It doesn't solve everything, but I think it's an important precedent.
Here. So jumping into the newsroom, so you've got, interestingly for you, because you're one of the biggest business publications in the world, one of the biggest business stories in the world is the AI bubble. So you've got essentially a newsroom full of journalists being given AI tools to report on AI as a bubble. How do you manage that conversation?
Fairly separately, I think. Yeah, I mean, here are the tools, do your job. Also, here's a great big story. Go and chase it.
Do your job.
Yeah. So I don't see that there's a tension there particularly. I think the use of AI in the newsroom has been good. I think we've lent into the experimentation with it. And I've seen something in the last couple of weeks which I think is particularly exciting and actually is also a potential license model, but certainly a subscription business, which is, and what I quite like about some of these license deals that we've done as well is that it's given value to the archive. So 92% of all FT articles are consumed within the first 7 days of publication. And after that, they're not, and they kind of gather dust. So licensing deals have given us a means to monetize that archive, and it's a powerful thing. But it turns out also that if you line up 3 million articles, which is what we've got, and you use some natural language processing and some large language model magic as well, and you start to extract sentiment from 30 years of our digital archive, you can start to create signals which become actually quite important. So one of the signals that we've extracted by lining up all of that content and looking at it longitudinally is, can we predict what the Bank of England are going to do with interest rates? And it turns out that we can predict using that AI tool better than the market can, in 10 months out of 12, what the Bank of England are going to do with interest rates. And we can predict US inflation better than the Fed. Now, that I think is a smart use of AI technology in the newsroom. I think we're all sat there going, well, how do we make the money out of this now then? But it just, I think, says to me there's intelligence that we can extract, and it sort of defines slightly differently what journalism could be in the future if you think about the value of the archive and you think about creative use of the kind of tools that we've put at our journalists.
I think it's interesting to think about it's two separate products, isn't it? One is a sort of journalism product, which is news, and the other is a data series product, which is an information archive, which stretches out over time.
Now, that challenges actually what the newsroom, I think, has perceived itself to be. We're journalists, we go out, we find the story. And actually now we're finding data journalism is, well, you don't have to leave the building. You just have to inquire in something that we've already got. Maybe bring in third-party data sets. How do you find that story in that unstructured data? That's redefining, I think, what journalism could be at the FT. And I think redefines us potentially not as a newspaper, but as an intelligence source. Yeah. And that puts us in a different operating theatre, I think.
Bring down your expenses bill as well.
I haven't yet seen any evidence of that.
I think it's so interesting because it slightly challenges also whether the licensing model traditionally, sort of when we've talked about it, it has been about licensing articles, which is still essentially the kind of structure of, I publish an article, now I'm going to license it. But what you're talking about there is almost completely repackaging everything, the granular components of an article, repackaging that over time and selling it on.
Yeah, and there's probably a couple of flavours of that. So one is we refine all of that ourselves. We do the kind of data's the new oil, blah, blah. Right? This is the kind of Formula One petrol version of that, super refined. We do all of the work.
Yep.
You tell us what you want, we find the signal, and we give you the signal from the noise. The other version of that is a slightly less refined version, which is we've got a pipe, and we don't know what you want to do with it. Here are the controls about what we will let you do with it, but we'll plug it in, and you find what solutions you need from it. So there's kind of two flavors to that as well. High volume, high value, lower value. And I think playing around with that.
That's interesting.
That kind of
where's your split nowadays? Sorry, this is a question I probably should know, but where's your split B2B, B2C?
So if we think about it in terms of subscription revenue, it's around about half and half.
Okay.
That's in digital. So if we add the newspaper over the top of that, it still tilts slightly towards consumer. But in digital subscriptions, it's around half and half.
So we kind of talked about the direct-to-business product.
Data to business.
Do you see these products also bubbling up in the consumer side?
Potentially, yeah. I mean, that's not where we've put effort. I think our consumer product use of AI has been, I heard the phrase table stakes a couple of times earlier. I think that's a fairly subjective phrase, but I think for us, it means summaries. Yep. Summaries, incidentally, for us are quite interesting. They've led to more people reading more depth of the article. So they've used it as a means to understand, is this an article I want to spend more time with, rather than replacing their reading of the article, which was our hypothesis, and it's proven. So summaries aren't replacing the full article, they're proving a better tease into reading the full article itself. So that's quite useful for us. But summaries, translations, we have an Ask FT answer engine model. That's been a useful experiment for us. That's a kind of consumer front-end piece. I think we could expand that Ask FT notion a little bit more and allow you to inquire in a slightly more sort of forensic way some of the things we've got. I was giving a talk at a school on Friday, and there were lots of questions about careers and how do I get into media. And one of the questions was, why is the US economy in so much debt? And what's it going to do about it? I was like, oh my God, I don't know the answer to that. but I've got a thing in my pocket which tells me. And so, there's that kind of aspect to it. But I think at the moment we're probably more interested in experimenting with the D2B businesses, which you've just coined.
Yeah, thank you.
Nice.
But we should touch on, because you mentioned earlier, just younger audiences. The point about that, I think, is they are going to be conditioned by prompting as a kind of means of query. And Ask FT is a good answer to that. But just generally, doing anything interesting with AI in that space, looking at kind of younger readers for the FT?
Well, we're not particularly with AI, no. We are pursuing younger readers in general. I think there was a point in the earlier panel which I thought was really well made around public information. And so when I first used ChatGPT 3 years ago this weekend, whatever it was, and I showed my twin girls who were 9, I said, look at this is crazy. You can ask it a question, it gives you an answer. They were completely nonplussed. They thought it was entirely unimpressive. Yep. Of course it does, Dad. You ask it a question, it gives you an answer. It's like Alexa. Oh, okay. Yeah. Now, the problem with that is that I think there is I'm not sure that people, young people, old people, middle-aged people, whatever, there's something about that interface which suggests that because you're asking me the question and because I answer politely, you will trust what I say. And we're not making a point, and this is particularly true to young people, actually, with young people, I think, about the difference between deterministic and probabilistic. And I've read this in the FT, so I'm stealing it from one of our journalists. A good example of a deterministic model is you and I both ask a calculator what 2 + 2 is. The answer's 4.
Yep.
You and I both ask a large language model a question. We're going to get a different answer depending on what we've read previously. And you can see a light go on when you explain that to young people about whether they should trust news in the context of large language models. And I think there is an industry-wide, I would love to see an industry-wide initiative that just educates people about when you ask a large language model a question, here's what you can expect back in response, and here's the degree of veracity you should expect to apply to that.
Came up with a great phrase a few months back, which was the idea that, we just, the panel before us is talking about kind of how publishers collectively can kind of work to create a more effective government, a kind of better level playing field with platforms. And you came up with the idea of a NATO for news.
I didn't. I stole it off our Director of Public Policy, Matt Rogerson, but with permission.
Yep, that's the joy of being the CEO, you get the credit. You get the credit.
I think the NATO for news that I was thinking about in that context was twofold, really. I think it's potentially the publisher marketplace that we were talking about in that earlier panel. I think that could be really powerful. And I think it does require publishers to get their heads together quickly, because to the gentleman's point earlier, there's lots of talk about this, but there's not a lot of action. I'll hold my hands up. We should probably do more at the FT to lean into that. But I think that sort of collective sense of defense, that collective sense of if you want it, you have to come here to get it, and here are the terms and rules around that, notwithstanding what our general counsel would tell me about competition
in a pro-competitive fashion.
In a pro-competitive fashion, that I think that collective response would be very powerful. But I think it's also about sharing intelligence around what various crawlers and bots are doing, because I'm very mindful that probably every publisher in this room has somebody, at least in their organisation, that they're paying for and technology that they're paying for to go out and try and establish exactly what is that crawler doing on our website. And that seems to me like an enormous amount of money that the industry is spending just to understand who's doing what. I think perhaps a pooled version of that could save us all some money and put us all in a smarter position.
Excellent. We have about 5 minutes left for questions. I'm sure you have some. He's always so good on this subject. So I'm sure you've got lots of questions. Who would like to ask a question?
Thank you. Hi, I'm Zoe Walters from Reuters. You spoke quite a bit about selling the archive. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about text versus visuals and the current conversation that you're having around visuals, editorial use, and personally identifiable information.
Yeah, so that's been problematic for us. When we've shipped our archive out, it's generally not included visuals, because a lot of those visuals, and by which I think you probably mean the photography or the imagery, is licensed and not owned by the FT. So we've exported text and not text with the visual. So that's how we've approached it. I don't really see a way through that. Yeah, so I think most of the environments that we're licensing it into aren't expecting to replicate the text verbatim with the image either. It's generally a snippet, and what we want them ideally to do is if there is any verbatim surfacing of what we've provided from the archive, it's a snippet with a link back to us and attribution, and that attribution is a really key part of the deals that we've been striking as well. There was a school of thought we had at the FT about, do we want attribution here? Do we want people to know that it's an FT article, that they could get it from here and not come to us? And actually we concluded that yes, we do want attribution next to that journalism. It's really important. But we've kept imagery away from that because it's just too hard to license. And right now our archive isn't in a good enough shape to be able to distinguish whether we've got permission or not.
Quite a lot of the conversation here when we've talked about use of AI in the newsroom has been quite sort of base level reformatting of text, sort of fairly junior level jobs. But is there any interesting work you think that's being done in how AI tools are actually making us rethink the exciting bit of journalism? Like, are AI tools starting to lead FT journalists to think about different types of stories that they can be doing with this extra superpower?
Well, I think that data journalism I was talking about earlier is really exciting. I think, I sort of call it 3D journalism. So rather than just, as I say, the 2D artifact of the article, having all the 3 dimensions to that article and all of the longitudinal view of the articles that might sit behind in any one given theme. So that sort of data journalism, I think, is really exciting. There's also data visual journalism that we're doing, where we're producing graphic representations of stories. So sort of infographics in effect, but huge huge sets of data that we can compress down into one image that tells a story very succinctly. Those things work incredibly well socially, actually, as well as on the site. So yes, I think to the point I was making earlier, I think it's questioning and challenging that the output and the format of the newsroom need not be a 700-word article only. Let's think, how could we tell a story in a very different way? So yeah, we're definitely heading there.
Thanks. I was interested in the concept of turning Google off. If you've got a big installed subscriber base where you can sell targeted advertising to those known users, what do you think the tipping point is in terms of the size of the engaged base versus no Google?
Well, so there always needs to be that aspect of traffic which is not yet an installed or registered subscriber, which we want to turn into one, so what we call prospect traffic. But I think if we're anything over 70%, 75%, and we're not too far away from that actually at this point, that begins to make me feel like we've got enough that we could meaningfully use, and we're getting into the zone where we could feel comfortable about saying we're out.
Hi John, Thomas from Engine Analysis.
Hey.
I'd love to understand how AI is helping you monitor, overall subscription management, understand churn, different audience cohorts. What sort of intelligence can these tools leverage to understand subscriber behaviors and to personalize content accordingly?
Yeah, so I'd split that into two: how we personalize content and how we apply it more specifically to the business model. So on the business model side, we have an AI-driven paywall where we've got permission to use a prospect's data in the provision of the paywall. We put different price points, different products, and that's given us a very big lift in our acquisition. So we're really happy with how we're applying that on that side. We also are pretty good at building out personas, so different kind of cohorts of customers, which we wouldn't traditionally be able to describe. And which machine models are better able to surface for us, and then we can adjust more of our marketing around that. We also use it for content recommendations. I think the question of personalization is always a slightly tricky one for us, and we're always trying to balance, yes, the machine says you want this, but I bet you didn't know you wanted this as well. and that, I think, has always actually been the value of a printed product. It tells you the things you didn't know you wanted to know. I worry a little bit that we could over AI and personalize some of that content recommendation. And actually all our research shows that whilst people do want to come in to go deep, they also want to come in for the breadth and the expertise of our human editors as well. So I think we'll continue to strike that balance as best we can.
What a lovely way to finish. Could you put your hands together for Jon Slade?
Thank you.
Thanks for listening, and to John and Chris for joining us at the AI Forum. We've got more exciting events coming up this year, from the Monetising B2B Forum in May, get your ticket now at flashesandflames.com, to our July newsletter and podcast summits and awards, and a return to the AI Forum next November. Remember, if you want to read our key takeaways article on this interview or sign up to our newsletter, you can find both at voices.media.